Hey, Redcasters, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos. Go Big Red. Let's move on here. Let's get into scoring explosion. This is going to be the offensive breakdown. This is going to be looking at what we think are going to be the ones and twos on offense going into this weekend here. To bring that up here, we have, let me move us to the side. So let's go down the first team first. And with quarterback, we're putting Jeff Sims at first. With running back, we listed 2 on the first team, Gabe Ervin, Rahmir Johnson. Wide receiver, we listed 3, Billy Kemp, Marcus Washington, Isaiah Garcia-Castaneda. At tight end, we gave 2 of them, Thomas Fidone, Nate Boerkircher, and then left tackle, Teddy Prochazka, Turner Corcoran at left guard, Ben Scott at center, Nouili at right guard, and then Bryce Benhart at right tackle. And down there at the bottom, we have Casey Thompson listed as out. So no doubt he would probably have been on the first or second team at least had he been healthy. But with him being out, that's where we have him right now. So again, I'll go back to you, Jim. We'll get started with you. As you look at this left column here, the first team, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think the first thing that pops up to me is that the wide receiver group is all transfers. We kind of talked about that last year too, a little bit, in terms of the depth not being there and the development not being there. And these guys are all, Billy Kemp's what, a 7th-year player, 6th-year player? He's up there. Marcus Washington, 5th year. IGC, he's up there, I think, in his 5th year as well. So I like those 3 guys. We'll see how they pan out. It sounds like Washington's having a great camp and has come along really well. Billy Kemp is solid. So I think overall maybe a B is kind of how I'd rate that, B+ in terms of that first line. That's my first impression, I think, overall. We'll see with Betts. Hopefully he can come along and continue to mature and do well in the classroom. And if he does, he's a difference maker. So we'll see. We lost Brown a couple of days ago. So, it sounds like from what Rule was saying, this is the group that's come along the most of any group in the on the team right now. So maybe credit to our young wide receiver coach, Garrett McGuire, and getting these guys ready to go. But that's my first, I think, 10,000-foot level kind of view of the whole thing right now as it stands today.
Well, Dave, give me your 10,000 foot level of this as well.
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting, the coaching changes, which we've now been through X number 5. I don't even know how many at this point, but the coaching change is always interesting off season because you really have no idea what offense they're going to run, how they're going to go about it, like how they're going to work with personnel, like what's it going to look like, are these guys going to stay on? So I think to me, Jeff Sims is probably the most interesting name on here for all of those reasons is, you bring an athlete in like Jeff Sims, who's, played a significant amount of Georgia Tech and ran a different offense entirely than, what Casey's running. To me, is that just because Rule really likes him and has liked him? And I think he recruited him all the way back at Baylor. Or is it because that's the offense he wants as a super athletic quarterback? Is it more in that run, that RPO type than a Casey Thompson drop back? I'm super interested to see what he does tomorrow on Saturday.
Can't come fast enough. I agree.
Yeah, it could be this afternoon, whatever time. I think he's an interesting athlete. I think, I've watched a ton of his film and, he's certainly got some accuracy challenges, a lot of the interceptions, but he's a heck of an athlete and that team just wasn't any good. So it was kind of hard to tell how much of that is him versus the team versus what he had with him. So that's probably the most interesting one to me. And I'd actually like to see Harburg air it out too. We're not getting a second team yet, but those two together, I think they've probably gotten a lot of snaps out with Casey out. So it'll be interesting to see what those guys can do.
Mac and I, a couple of weeks ago, we had Glenn Snodgrass on, Coach Snodgrass from York High School. So he was at the coach's clinic, and then he was at the first full contact scrimmage and they did this again last Saturday on the next scrimmage. But Coach Rule talks about he sent those QBs live. And the idea a couple of weeks ago, the offense had the advantage on the defense, and the defense had to adjust to a quarterback who was mobile. And his response very much was Sims he's a gamer, man, and his legs can be a part of this. But he also threw the ball well. We'll get to Harburg, but he said a lot of the same things about Harburg's legs for sure. That he's definitely quite the runner. And I thought it was interesting to hear the transition of the team from that scrimmage 2 weeks ago to the last scrimmage, where the defense had the had the advantage on them for the most part over the course of it. So that tells you that you want to see some of that give and take and that going back and forth in spring. You don't want one side constantly dominating. And they also adjusted and were tackling better by the second scrimmage. And, we all saw that last year against, after the Oklahoma loss when we switched DCs and they talked about how, we're starting to tackle for the first time in practice, and shocking how you get better doing things like that when you actually do it. And so anyways, I'm ecstatic with the talent that I see here, without a doubt. I'm also interested to see how flexible and mobile they are. We've talked so much about speed and what's the strength and conditioning differences there. Rob, before we keep moving here, do you have anything first team wise, any specific player you're looking at, or is there a position group that you're really interested in?
So my answer will be the same all night. Every time you ask, is I'll be looking at the trenches all night long. That's what I'll be watching. I'll be watching how the offensive line, like you just said, how they're moving, how flexible they are. One guy last year that I saw a lot of in the spring game, obviously, was Kevin Williams Jr., right? And he was like a big guy, super athletic, really physical, pushing guys back. Then he got injured. We didn't see him play a whole lot last year. I want to see if our guys are kind of looking like that this year, right? Like really flexible, getting the push on the defensive line. But then again, if they're getting too much of a push, that's going to worry me as well, because that's our offensive line and those are our ones. So I'd like to see a lot of stalemates in the middle and just, and make sure our quarterbacks are protected, make sure our wide receivers are, making some nice plays and beating defenders. But I'd also like to kind of see it go the other way too. So I know it sounds like a really boring, answer there, but I will be keeping my eyes on the trenches the most. That's the most important thing in the Big Ten.
There's nothing boring about it. That's what Trev said when he was looking to hire coaches. We need to start winning the trenches. I want to go to you, Jim, and you helped out a lot last night with kind of formulating these first and second strings. And it was an iterative process, I'll call it. We went back and forth and kind of came to where we had here. But when before spring ball started, the Redcast, we did projections on the position groups, but all we did was only scholarship players because we had 105. I was like, we're not going to go through all 150 or whatever we had at the time. We're just going to do it just scholarship players, position group by position group. But as we're looking at this, you mentioned Nate Boerkircher. We should definitely be including him there at tight end. We have him on the first string. There's some walk-ons here that we'll get to on the second string, offense and defense as well. So look at this offense from a balance standpoint, from transfers, from guys that are returning guys that have been in the program for multiple years. We have walk-ons in there. I mean, what does that kind of tell you, that there's a lot of different players from a lot of different backgrounds? You mentioned all three of the wide receivers are transfers. I mean, what does that kind of tell you, just the makeup of this group?
Yeah, I think that's kind of an interesting question, because you look at it's first year for Matt Rule, so he's not looking to maybe start just freshmen and sophomores to build up for year 2 and 3. He wants to win now. And so my impression is whoever's going to give him the best chance to win now, whether it's, Marcus Washington, whether it's a 7th year and Billy Kemp, whether it's Nate Boerkircher, it doesn't matter to him, who you are or where you were, the depth chart last year or what program you were with last year. If you can help Nebraska win now, like as in August 31st, you're going to play. And I think as a fan, I like that. I mean, I'm all for development and building up. And, I know what his history is like in the last, 2 stops at Baylor, where year 1 is a struggle, and I don't want to struggle. I want to win right now. I've been struggling for the last 20 years and the last 6 years specifically. So I like the fact that it's a good mix. And I think he's going to give guys like Ty Hahn and Boerkircher and John Bullock, we'll get to him in a little bit, but he's going to put him on scholarship. I really do. He's going to reward these guys that have, worked their tails off and got into a position where they're going to press for playing time over guys that are on scholarship. And I think that's my takeaway is he doesn't really care where you were last year. It's all about this year. And if you're going to help this team win, you're going to be in there.
Yeah. Well, Dave, I mean, right there, we bring up these previous stops, Baylor, and we bring up Temple, but what's that sign behind you? What does that say?
Oh, wait,
this is the year. I mean, we can't get there going 2-10 or 1-11. That can't.
Or 6-6. We can't go 6-6 either.
We need to win games. I mean, just first team before we even get into the depth. Do we have the talent here? Do you see to get to the, we'll just say 6+ category? Do you have any concerns at all about the talent that we have on this team in year 1?
No, at all. But that's also like my biggest kryptonite, which you're very well aware of, is we're in the most beautiful time of year. This is the off season when we can be anybody we want to be, and we can believe, every player is going to fulfill their full potential until September. And so there's this 9-month period when we can get to live in this like fantasy land. Is my favorite time of year. I love it. It's incredible. Like, it gets the juices going. You get all fired up about it. We're like, oh my God, these guys are back. Like, I see that list. I'm like, oh, Fidone, he's healthy. Oh yeah. I mean, I guess he's blew out both of his knees, and but remember when he was sick as an 18-year-old? Like, that's all I see. Is like, oh yeah, that guy's awesome. And like, Prochazka's back. That's amazing. Like, oh, he blew out a knee too. But forget about that. And Ben Scott got hurt a little bit. Like, no big deal. And oh my God, Rahmir Johnson's back. Well, he didn't play at all last year. So like, there's this element where I see this list. I'm like, oh my God, what if like the Rahmir Johnson from that Michigan game shows up? And then also the Jeff Sims that plays really well, but not the one that throws all the interceptions, shows up. And Gabe Ervin's healthy, and Rahmir's healthy, and like Billy Kemp all of a sudden becomes like an All-American. So I just see him like, oh my God, this team's unbelievable. How do we get this all-star team? Like, how do we put all these players together? So now I'm like, hey, getting me all fired up. I'm like, this is the best team I've ever seen on paper, besides the '94 team, which I've started to go down. That's a humbling, man. You guys I don't want to go down. I've been talking about that all night, but I'm like deep in the archives on this thing. That's a humbling experience to go down like some of the stats from those guys. I said this on the last podcast. I don't think I said it on this one yet, but they didn't give up a sack the entire season. Like, do you know how many we had last year?
Oh, geez. 35.
Yes.
Like
33.
Exactly? Okay.
It's zero sacks in 94. What are you talking about? That's insane. So somehow we got to go from 33 down to 0. But this is the team to do it. I can feel it.
Before we move on to, I think one of the things like Jim kind of said, and it's one of the biggest things that bothers me about like the whole narrative on Rule and his previous coaching stops for college with Temple and Baylor and like his record in the first year, because he's not the kind of guy that's going to be blowing smoke up our asses, pardon my language, and he's not going to be saying things just to say it, just to make us happy. I think he's coming from a perspective of like, what he honestly sees out there. And you can tell there's hesitation in his voice when saying things, but he has said multiple times that he hasn't worked with this kind of talent in year one in either one of those programs. And so I think that's part of why all of a sudden now, like, I didn't even bring my Kool-Aid jar tonight because, I mean, at this point, I think it's a little bit too heavy for me to pick up. It's so full. And I mean, and I think it's just a really bad narrative, I think, even for fans to sit there and say, well, we can't expect him to do very well this year because, in the past at Baylor or at Temple, here was his record and here's his overall record, which is the biggest crock of BS that I've ever heard. What we have to think about is that he has never started a program with this much talent already on the team, right? A lot of people are saying, well, we're not picking up all these transfer. We have over 100 scholarships on the team, right? Like, we don't have to be picking
down
up,
to 97
down to 97.
Still got to get 12 knocked off.
And I can only name one guy that I know for a fact actually left from the team who whose name I've heard multiple times, right? So it's like we're also retaining a lot of these kids right now, which means to me that they want to play on Saturday. We may see some turnover after Saturday, but these kids are here to compete, and says everything.
And we will see a little bit of turnover after Saturday. We know that. We have to get numbers into the right spots anyways. But that's also something for fans to understand, that we don't have to go overboard every single time on Twitter after one guy leaves. We know that that's going to happen. There's probably going to be someone that leaves that maybe you didn't expect was going to.
Probably still will, though.
Yeah. And there's probably someone on this list that will probably leave. And
at least we're not like that other school that's right down the street from me, where like some of their best players are leaving before their spring game is even played on Saturday. And they're, it's like,
they have good players. It looks like they're just playing with like high school players, junior high guys.
Well, I mean, the guys that didn't want to play against the junior high guys are leaving.
I got it. So like all the JVs leaving. Got it.
To me, that's the win as much as anything. The win that Coach Rule has done with this current team is just to even get us to this point where we haven't had a mass exodus of guys. They're going through the process. They're going to go through this game. And, and they've, as long as they've given it that effort, I mean, it's not like you don't need to go and kick the guy off before you even have a chance to see him. And so there's going to be some guys that will probably leave that we didn't expect. And there's going to be some guys that are going to surprise that we weren't expecting either. And I think maybe some of them can come from this second string. And let's go to this right column. And we have Heinrich Harburg as the quarterback, Anthony Grant and A.J. Allen, two guys that were playing last year at running back. At wide receiver, Joshua Fleeks, the transfer from got originally recruited to Baylor by Coach Rule, so 4 or 5 years ago. Xavier Betts, who is back on the team. Ty Hahn, you mentioned him, Jim. So Ty Hahn, he's a walk-on from Nebraska. At tight end, Janarian Bonner. So that was one of those first year we're going to be moving some guys around positions. They've taken Bonner, a big wide receiver, and kind of put him into a hybrid kind of tight end wide receiver position there. Eric Gilbert, big-time recruit or transfer from Georgia, 6'6", 270, and I've heard he's even bigger than that. And then left tackle, the true freshman Gunnar Gotchula. Left guard, Ethan Piper. Centers, Justin Jenkins, who again, when I talked with the Snodgrass, they said that he didn't even know the guy's name, but he was just like the backup center who was playing that day. He's like, I didn't see any crazy snaps. Nothing was going wrong there, and that's a good sign as much as anything. And then Henry Lutovsky at right guard, and then Jacob Hood, another one of the Georgia transfers, big guy, 6'8", 345. We have him at right tackle. Okay, I'll start again with you here, Jim. I guess, we went through this last night, but I'll still ask you. And again, any Redcasters watching, feel free to throw in your thoughts here. Rob, post them. Where did we get it wrong, Jim? Do you see any one guy you're like, oh, geez, I could see him on the left side or vice versa, or just someone to really keep an eye on?
Yeah, so I think you look at the running backs, Anthony Grant and A.J. Allen. If you would ask me before the winter conditioning who is going to be 1 and 2, I would have said A.J. Allen 1 and Anthony Grant 2.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, going into the spring game, I think they're 3 and 4. Now, A.J. Allen is going to be, I don't know if he's going to play. I've heard, we've heard maybe possible concussion. Don't know exactly what the situation is there, but he's banged up. It sounded like he could probably play on Saturday if there's a game, Rule said. But, I think it's kind of surprising a little bit that Gabe Ervin jumped out and has had a great camp. I mean, maybe it's not surprising because he had a great camp 2 years ago and it was the starter game 1, the first time ever a freshman started game 1 for Nebraska. Mm-hmm. But I think for me, A.J. Allen, Anthony Grant, where they're at right now, is a little surprising. Will that change? We'll see. But mm-hmm. I think Allen's the best running back on the team, and where that goes from here, we'll kind of have to wait and see. But I think overall there's good depth there at that spot. So I think that one, number 1. Gatula, early enrollee, possibly, it sounds like he's number 2 behind Prochazka. So, enrolls early and he's getting tons of playing time. So mm-hmm. I think those 3 right there for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's take a clip here from the press conference on Saturday. And this is Coach Rule talking about the injury list, just to kind of go over the overall health of the team right now.
Everyone that's been out still kind of out. We've had nothing really major. We've got some guys that are banged up. We have a lot of a couple guys that I'm sure if we were playing a game this week would have had Ben Scott probably available. Would have had A.J. Allen close to available. I think a lot of those guys will trend to be back this week. Blaze Gunnarson's been back practicing with us, which is good. He's a player I'm really excited about. I like what he does. So I think we're in a good space.
Dave, I'm looking at this right side here, and I'm seeing 2 guys that were in Athens, Georgia last year and were big-time recruits, and I see them still, in the second team here. They didn't just transfer from the SEC and go right into a starting position. And not that there's not good things to expect from Gilbert or from Hood down the road down too, but does that speak to some of the depth that we have here? Is that they were backups there and they came here, and right now we have them listed as backups here?
Yeah, I think Gilbert's super interesting. Again, back to my Kool-Aid brain of like ignoring the fact that he didn't really play much at Georgia and just exclusively looking at the fact that he is an absolute monster, right? He's like an absolute giant human, 6'6", 270, but is that what you got? 6'6", 270? Yeah, but he can move.
I've heard he's bigger, and he had that good season at LSU as a freshman.
Yeah, but he can move, and he's one of those freaks for coming out of high school. He's very highly rated across the board. So I think that's a pretty interesting one. Again, you hope Fidone's like healthy and can run the way that he ran in high school. But I would say Gilbert's super interesting. I think Fleeks is super interesting too. I think he's, I think he's a speed demon from what I've heard. The one that's not on here, and obviously we're just talking about the spring game, but I posted this to Twitter and got a lot of Malachi Coleman. as far as like, he's going to be the wide receiver that makes noise in the fall. I don't know what you guys think about that one. I think that's kind of an interesting one. I always feel like you need to give a kid a couple of years, but he's definitely got some raw talent. What do you guys think about him?
I mean, he changes the game in terms of the size. Even, we have decent size at wide receiver, but you don't see anybody on this list here, at least, that matches his intangibles. And then on top of it, the fact that he lives right here in Lincoln and he's been at virtually every practice. So, he's not enrolled right now. He's still at Lincoln East, but he's been to as many of the spring practices, and I guess getting the mental reps, if that helps expedite any of his summer training, all the better. In fact, Rob, that's something next week you can talk with Miranda and Craig a little bit about, and just kind of get some of the feedback on what they think of how he has gone out and really built some of those connections already with the team by being around him all the time. Yeah, Jim, what are you thinking there with Malachi?
I think based on what Rula said, I think Malachi's going to play early next year. Because I agree with you, Honky. I don't see anybody else on this list that has his skill set. Obviously Betts, we don't know if that's going to pan out. I think it's going to, but we don't know yet. So the fact that Coleman's invested, coming to these practices and he's got that speed and that size, and he's a difference maker. So I can see him definitely playing early and not burning his red shirt for sure.
Yeah, 6'4", and the speed that he brings with that size of body. That's one thing they always say, you can't coach speed. Well, and we know how important speed is to this staff. Not only can you not coach speed, you also can't coach height. If you're a speed demon and you're 5'10", that's great. But if you're a speed demon and you're 6'4", that's even better. And that's something that we have with Malachi. So how quickly he gets into the playbook, how quickly he acclimates to the college game, that's like any freshman. That's the most important thing. But that's part of what I think he's doing right now, is trying to be down there, right in practice, right in the drills, and see everything he can at a close level.
And I bet you, I think he knows that too. I bet you he knows his chance is right now. He's got an opportunity on that field as a freshman, and that's why he's there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and for those people that had joined us kind of late in the beginning, I announced that I'll be speaking with Miranda and Craig Coleman next Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Central Time. Just a little bit about their son's journey to where he's at. I will be asking them questions about, kind of what he's been doing this spring around the team, because I know for a fact that he has, like you said, he has been around the team a lot, attending practices. It's his senior year, so he's probably done with school really at this point. And, he just wanted to be able to run track, and he's doing that on Thursday nights and obviously attending track practice in the afternoons for high school. But that'll be a really good. And so if there are questions for that as well, feel free to shoot me DMs on Twitter at RedcastRob, or, post them, just straight up on the YouTube setup that we already have. Go to our channel, subscribe, like it, all that fun stuff.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, and I think one thing that you said there, Jim, about the offense, having the running backs, and I agree with where we have them here, having them on the right side, but they were the guys that it was first off, it was, can we keep them? If you go back to November and December, can we not lose Grant? Can we not lose Allen? Well, we didn't. Coach Rule did an amazing job to keep those guys engaged. They stayed here. They've gone through this semester, and as of right now, I think it's fair as of right now. This is very important for anyone that watches this today and watches it a week from now and 2 weeks from now. These are not, written in ink. These can change. These names can move around, but just at least going into this right now, I would have Ervin and Rahmir on the first team, and that says a lot to the depth of that running back room, because I know we saw some really good things from Grant, and if Allen would have stayed healthy, we know that there's some really good things with him too. So. Again, this goes back to a talent thing. I think we've got some talent.